Now available in paperback and e-readers, Spellbound, A Darker Shade of Black. Get your copy today at your favorite online bookseller. In last week's videos, I pretty much deconstructed the false narrative of black feminist media, which masquerades as black mainstream media. And in the first video, I established a timeline showing black people the narrative that black feminists have presented in films and television over the last 30 years. And in the second video, I pretty much began showing you who the players were who present black feminist media, and I pretty much deconstructed the false narrative of black feminist media. Now, in this video, I'm going to talk about the cornerstone of black feminist media. And the cornerstone of black feminist media is trade publishing. Now, trade publishing lays the foundation for most of the narrative of black feminist media. And the reason why it lays the cornerstone is because black feminist media has its core roots in academia. Professors like Alice Walker, professors like Angela Davis, all of them pretty much lay the foundation for the publications of trade published books by mainstream publishers and the narrative for those books. Because what many people do not understand about trade publishing is that trade publishing these days is controlled by white feminists, and white feminists allowed black feminists to have a corner of the market for themselves to continue pushing the black feminist narrative, because the black feminist narrative pretty much benefits the white feminists, because what happens is when you have black people following this narrative, they are walking lockstep in the path of the white liberal and staying on that road that fits within his narrative. Every black literature that you read that pretty much fits this narrative has people mentally conditioned to believe that the ideas regarding the black image and black culture are the absolute truth, because they are coming from a black person. But because most black people do not question the source, they do not understand that they're following a black feminist narrative. And again, this black feminist narrative pretty much started in the 1970s in black academia with professors like Alice Walker. Now, your Alice Walker was instrumental in reviving the works of the late Zora Neale Hurston. However, she was not reviving the works of the late Zora Neale Hurston so that people could see what a great writer she was. It was to pretty much bring these books out so she could continue to push a black feminist narrative. And she wanted to push that feminist narrative at the earliest ages to young children. And she did that with books like Their Eyes Are Watching God. Now, when we look at her interpretation of the book, it's clearly a feminist interpretation of the book. And this is what's taught to children all throughout the United States. And under this narrative, we are all taught that this Janie Crawford character is the victim of the abuses of black men, and that she learns to love herself in spite of these abuses from black men. However, when you start deconstructing Their Eyes Are Watching God from a more objective view, you see the parts that Alice Walker left out in her analysis. And the parts she left out in her analysis relate to this Janie Crawford character's past. And in that past, she leaves out the part where Janie Crawford's mother and grandmother were the victims of violence by white men, which led to the conception of Janie Crawford and her mother. And they leave out the part that Janie Crawford was raised by a single grandmother. How is that important? Because this teacher of culture taught her the dysfunction which led to her marrying this Logan Killick's character, who was presented to everyone by Alice Walker as a pervert. And yes, he was a pervert. But when we look at the narrative from the panoramic perspective, we see that Nanny, the grandmother, wanted Janie to marry this man so she could have stuff that she and her mother did not have. So when you look at it from that panoramic perspective, you see how the feminists pretty much slanted the story to fit their narrative. And sadly, several generations of black girls have grown up reading this book and being taught this misinterpretation of this book. And because they've been taught this misinterpretation, they believe what the black feminist says regarding black men, and they're taught to hate black men at an early age. Later on, we see in publications like The Color Purple how this Alice Walker continues to push this black feminist narrative in literature. And the reason why she pushes the narrative in The Color Purple, again, is to pretty much malign the image of black men. Because in this book, again, we have this Seeley who is being abused by all these no good black men. And in this book, which was turned into a movie by Steven Spielberg, again, we see the black men being monsters, being brutes, and again, perpetuating many of the same stereotypes that white supremacists say about black men onto this black woman who was pretty much a whipping post for all these abuses. And the only way for her to escape these abuses is through a homosexual relationship. And this is the narrative of the black feminists. They either want to push a homosexual narrative or they want to push a narrative which deifies white men. But when you look at The Color Purple, again, this is another book that was taught in public schools and pretty much imbibed by small children, and again pushes a narrative promoting the hatred of black men, more misandry, and maligns the image of black men, because the book is not taught in an objective perspective and shows you a panoramic picture of the book, the meanings, and the narrative. And when you look at this book and you also look at the foundations of this trade publishing market, you will also start to understand, how deep this goes. Because when we look at all these black feminist literature, I look at it and I say to myself, I'm noticing with Alice Walker's The Color Purple, this was a book that won a National Book Award. And I noticed that this is a book that was acclaimed prominently by your academia, which clearly shows me the collusion that, your academia has with black feminists in pushing this black feminist narrative and pushing this whole idea of this black woman being abused in literature. Because when we look at your academia and we look at, these book awards, it's interesting to me that all these black books which pretty much promote a black feminist narrative are always the ones winning these national book awards. They're always being acclaimed by critics, and they're always the ones that wind up on lists like Oprah's Book Club, which clearly shows me how deep this goes in pushing this black feminist narrative in literature. Because almost every book, again, that wins these national book awards and is acclaimed by your mainstream media all push a black feminist narrative. And all the books that pretty much are promoted by other black feminists in media, like your Oprah Winfrey Show, as Oprah's Book Club, again, push that black feminist narrative and push this whole idea that this black woman is being victimized and abused by no good black men. This is what's being pushed to the forefront in mainstream media. But because most black people don't have critical thinking skills, they think black literature is black literature, but they don't look at the narrative being pushed by black feminists as black literature. And then in the 1990s, we look at Terry McMillan's Waiting to Exhale, a book that pretty much was struggling for a while until they started pushing it with the black feminist narrative. And in the black feminist narrative, Terry McMillan sold the book by saying that there was a shortage of black men, that most of the black men that are out there are no good. Again, promoting more misandry and promoting more black feminist ideas in trade publishing, and never once, in his timeline, ever giving any black man a chance to rebut any of these arguments, deconstruct any of these arguments, or refute any of these arguments. Because if you look at Terry McMillan's Waiting to Exhale from a panoramic perspective, excuse me, you're going to see that the book also, like many of these other ones I've mentioned, is deeply flawed. And when you look at Terry McMillan's Waiting to Exhale, you see that she's sitting here talking about the shortage of good black men, but the book is set in Phoenix, Arizona. How many black men are in Phoenix, Arizona? So that argument right there is fundamentally flawed when we look at the setting. Then we look at the characters, one who is a side piece who is having an adulterous affair with a married man, a second one who is out here, decides to commit adultery with a married man because no man meets her standards, a third woman with severe mental health problems, and a fourth woman who is a single mother and is overweight. But they're all going to be victims of no good black men. But when we deconstruct their situation, we see why all four of these women are single, and how the whole argument of a shortage of black men makes absolutely no sense when you start to take this book apart. Now, Waiting to Exhale was the foundation for the explosion in the black book market. And this, again, pushed the black feminist narrative to, the highest levels, because we got book after book after book pretty much talking about how these single, successful, well-educated black women could not find a black man, how they could not find a good black man, how there was a shortage of good black men. And a lot of people, again, don't look at this and say, there seems to be some sort of narrative and theme to all these books, and they all seem to be pushing some sort of narrative that, fits a framework for a story that's trying to be told about black men. Because when you look at the narrative of all these books and you follow the timeline, it coincides exactly with the timeline of the film and television media presented in media as black media. And when you look at it, again, from that panoramic perspective, you see that there wasn't many black men being allowed to the stage and allowed an opportunity to rebut many of these arguments being presented by black women, deconstruct these arguments, or refute these arguments. And the few black men that got up there, like Michael Baisden here and there, were pretty much self-published because the white feminists and the black feminists colluded to keep their voices from being heard. And I know this for a fact because back in the 1990s, I was trying to submit my first novel, The Changing Soul, to trade publishers, and I ran into a brick wall. And I also, ran into a brick wall when I tried to submit fantasy like the first ISIS back in 1999-2000. And then in 2004, when I did my first romance novel, The Cassandra Cookbook, I also ran into this wall. And I didn't understand what the wall was until, a couple of years ago when a best-selling author friend of mine was telling me why several of these women who decided they were mad after reading the Cassandra Cookbook tried to go on and try to roast me after I had self-published it. And I started to understand why people were having issues with the Cassandra Cookbook. Now, the Cassandra Cookbook, when I submitted it to publishers and agents, they were people eager when they read the premise. However, they kept rejecting the book because of something. They kept saying it wasn't right for them. And I didn't understand what it was, again, until that best-selling author friend told me what that was. And when I found out what that was, I started to realize why people didn't want to buy the book. The reason why the publishers didn't want to buy the book, again, is because it did not fit the black feminist narrative. And in the black feminist narrative, it works like this. Because in the Cassandra Cookbook, I pretty much have a story where this successful baker is going to have to try to help her family, and she's about to get married. And when she goes home to try to take care of some business at home, she finds her fiancé in bed with another man. And I'm presenting this down-low gay man as a bad guy. And when it comes down to the black feminist narrative and the white feminist narrative regarding gay characters, you can't present a gay character as a bad guy. So that's why the book wasn't right for them, because it didn't fit their narrative for gay men, especially black gay men. And that's why they were turning the book down, in spite of the writing being very solid and very strong. And this is why many of those people were trying to roast the book up, because I was presenting the whole concept of this down-low man as a bad guy, and saying that this down-low man was trying to use this black woman as a way to get married to advance his career, because he was trying to say that in order to get ahead in his career, he had to be heterosexual, so he had to present a heterosexual image and was going to go out here and have homosexual relationships with men on the side. And this is what down-low men do all the time, but they didn't want that narrative promoted in media, because your black feminists and your white feminists see gay men as good guys, and they want to promote the whole idea of gay men being good guys. But as I see it, if you're going to do stories about diversity, you just can't say that the gay guy is just a good guy. You have to have bad guys as well. There has to be balance in the media. But when it came down to that book, I ran into the wall from the black feminists and the white feminists regarding that narrative they are pushing. And I also saw another narrative being pushed by your black feminists and white feminists as it relates to trade publishing, with the deification of white men. Now, a lot of people will sit there and say, oh, this deification of white men in black literature is a new thing, but it's not. You might see an explosion of all these books right now, but the book that came out before this was by author Kim McLaren, in around late 1999, 2000, was a book called Taming It Down. Now, in this Taming It Down novel, we have this single, successful, well-educated black woman who is a reporter and is going out looking for stories. And one of the things that's part of this story this is a book that pretty much this black woman is out here chasing a white man. And this is the book that pretty much lays the foundation for the deification of white men in black publications. They're Kim McLaren's Taming It Down. And Kim McLaren pretty much established her whole career on the start of this whole black woman, white man romance. And that all of her books pretty much feature this theme. And she was the first pioneer to do this in the late 20th century and early 21st century. And it's exploded over the last couple of years, but it all fits within the black feminist narrative for trade publications. And when it comes down to your black feminists, again, they want to maintain control over the black mainstream media. They want to control the viewpoints. They want to control the narrative. They want to control the stories being told. And they don't want other stories coming out that pretty much challenge the narrative they are presenting. And that's why we are not seeing books from mainstream publishers, many of them from black men, unless they fit, the narrative of players, dusty dudes, and that type of narrative where we see guys like Carl Weber and many others. But in some cases, they're self-published. But we're not really seeing those books being pushed and supported by your black mainstream media because, again, they don't fit the narrative. And we don't see the viewpoints and the counterpoints from black men as it relates to trade publications because, again, they don't fit the narrative of the black feminists and the white feminists as it relates to black media. Because under this group, they only want to see one set of viewpoints regarding the black image. They only want to hear a couple of stories related to the black image. They only want to hear a couple of stories related to the black experience. And that makes it very hard for people to get a clearer picture of the black experience, black culture, because when we're seeing everything from the view of the black feminist, again, we're seeing a distorted picture that does not show us the truth because according to the black feminist, the black woman is a victim of the abuses of black men. But again, how can a black woman be oppressed by black men when black men have no economic power and they have no voice to tell their stories in mainstream media? Now, I produce books under the SJS Direct imprint to try to give my perspective and talk about different stories in the black experience. And all my stories are available on Amazon.com. And if you want to see black stories from a different perspective than mainstream media, you can just click a link in the description box.